This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
For the second year, we're proud to have been asked by the Public School Forum of North Carolina to conduct a discussion on public education at the Eggs and Issues Breakfast. For 30 years, the Public School Forum has been our state's leading advocate for education, and this forum has just released a report of the top 10 education issues for 2016. We don't have time to cover them all, but we want to try to hit the highlights for you. First, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include John Hood, who's a syndicated columnist and a founding panelist of NC Spin. Chris Fitzsimon, head of NC Policy Watch, also a founding panelist. Keith Poston, the president and executive director of the Public School Forum of North Carolina. Melanie Chernoff, who's the manager of government and community relations for Red Hat Software. Representative Hugh Blackwell from Valdez, who's the chairman of the House Education Appropriations Committee. And Steve Lassiter, who's the 2015 Principal of the Year from Pactolus Elementary School in Pitt County. Let's get started. In the introduction of the Top 10 Issues report, the Public School Forum reported that 2015 was a year of uncertainty. Representative Blackwell, Senate Finance Chair Bob Rucho declared that our public school system had failed. Is this a commonly held belief in our legislature?
Tom, I think what I would say is that most members of the legislature would say that our education system is characterized by a combination of successes and failures. And the challenge we have as legislators is trying to understand data, which frequently is not very good or even available, to help identify the successes so we can try to replicate those, expand them, build on them, and also in the areas where we're not doing so well, try to fix those areas, either by abandoning something that's unsuccessful or modifying it in a way to hopefully improve it.
Chris, regardless of whether our elected officials consider public education a failure or not, there is absolutely no questioning the fact that we have seen a shift from elected officials and public policy makers away from total support of public schools toward more charters and private schools. What's the motivation in your mind for this shift?
Well, I think that the motivation is there are a lot of members of the General Assembly that do believe our schools are failing, as Senator Rucho suggested, and are sort of trying anything they can to fix it. The danger, of course, is that we're doing that, as the Public School Forum, I think, has correctly pointed out, with very little accountability.
What meaning should we take from the fact that our state budget had a $2 billion surplus last year? We were diverting more and more dollars to charter schools and private schools, and yet our legislature said there wasn't enough money to fund additional for public schools.
Well, I think actions speak louder than words. I think that it showed that education wasn't really the priority that it could have been. Now, we've seen some positive movement on some things. We did some things, particularly for early career teachers. But I think when you look at the big picture of where we were and the hole we had dug ourselves, not just over the last 5 years, but the last 10 years, that we needed to do a lot more, and we actually had the ability to do so, I think, with just modest changes in taxes.
John, the statistics from the Public School Forum show that we're 43rd in the nation in per pupil expenditures, and adjusted for inflation, we're actually spending $855 less per child than we were before the recession. Is there a direct correlation between the amount we spend and the performance we get?
No, and I'd agree with 50% of those statistics, the latter one. No one in the debate believes that money is irrelevant. The debate is about the effective use of money, and most people on the left, right, and center would favor increased spending on education as long as they're confident it will result in better outcomes. It just doesn't automatically happen. It depends on how the money is allocated.
All right, Steve, while we're on this discussion of the budget, what kind of impact does it have when you're so late finding out what your budget's going to be?
Well, a number of schools were delayed in the hiring process, whether it was your certified staff or your classified staff with teacher assistants. There were a number of teacher assistants that could not report to work or had to receive a reduction in force because there was no budget to determine whether or not they could continue employment.
As you are hiring students, just graduates, how important is it that they be able to read and follow instructions and do simple math and things of that nature?
That's the easiest question I'm going to get all day.
It is.
I mean, obviously, it's hugely important that students have basic skills when they come out of high school. We see a real skills gap in North Carolina. 70% of manufacturers say that the candidates that they're looking to hire don't have the technical skills that they need to fill the jobs that we have here in North Carolina. And more disturbingly, 67% of North Carolina jobs are going to require some kind of post-secondary education by 2020. That's only 5 years from now, and only about half of our workforce has that. So, you know, we in the business community have been talking about the need for higher academic standards and the ability for our students to fill those gaps. So we really feel like the public school system has to align better to the business needs so we can employ those workers tomorrow.
Hugh, when we talk about Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger, I think succinctly and correctly said the first 3 grade students learn to read, and after that they read to learn.
Actually, even though it's been in place only a short time, our performance on the NAEP scores, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, it's given in the 4th grade, was one of the best performances we've had. I think they are also the one that said that North Carolina received very high rankings for our honesty in how we set our standards. So this is an area that is going to need continued focus. I'm personally hoping that we're going to maybe consider adding some reading coaches to also work with the teachers in those early grades.
We hope you're enjoying this special program devoted to public education, and we'll have more after these messages.
I still believe in the Constitution. That's why I back Buck.
I believe in the Second Amendment. That's why I back Buck.
I want someone who puts North Carolina first. That's why I back Buck.
In the upcoming Republican primary, back Buck. Buck Newton for Attorney General.
Let's prepare our state for the future by supporting the Connect NC bond. The bond will fund smart investments in education, agriculture, state parks, our National Guard, and infrastructure projects, creating job opportunities, strengthening our workforce, and driving innovation. It's a timely investment and a smart one for North Carolina families. On March 15th, stand with Farm Bureau and vote for the Connect NC bond.
Each year, our state pension plan pays more than $500 million in investment fees. I'm Ron Elmer for Treasurer, and I'll save $50 million or work for free. Go to elmerfortreasurer.com, paid by Citizens for Elmer.
We now return to more public education issues on NC Spin. John, last year on this forum, we had a lot of conversation, Craig Horn was here, about the Academic Standards Review Commission's work on the Common Core standards. They made suggestions for revising the English curriculum, but essentially they punted so far as math was concerned. What grade would you give their work?
I'd give it a C+, B-. I don't think I would agree with your characterization that they punted on math. What actually happened is there was a proposal to adopt all or most of the math standards of another state, Minnesota, and then the commission decided in the end not to do that, but they did decide to make recommendations similar to the recommendations they had made in English and language arts, that the standards be modified.
There was strong evidence that teachers supported the Common Core, even though it was very complicated and difficult to implement, especially so far as the math curriculum was concerned. How much impact do you think that had on the commission's report?
I think it had a dramatic impact on it, and I'm glad that the commission listened to the folks who were teaching every day in the classroom. I think that's one of the things that's been missing from the policy debate in the last few years in North Carolina, is actually assuming what teachers are doing and what they say without listening to them. So I hope that that's a trend that we'll see continue.
What do you think we can expect from the state board so far as how they handle this discussion on curriculum, and what decisions might they make?
So I think that they'll be thoughtful about it. I hope that they're not having to look over their shoulders to see what happens next if they don't do what is expected.
Should the legislator just butt out of this and let these folks do their work? Well, that's a loaded question.
That is a loaded question.
Well, I believe that, our State Board of Education is very well capable of making the decisions that they've been entrusted to do by the public. And I think that we should have our confidence in them to be able to ensure that our standards are aligned, that they are appropriately written for our children right here in North Carolina. So I think they should leave all of that to the State Board and the Commission.
Last year was the first year that we had this required grading of our schools. Let's talk about the formula first. The formula says 80% of a school's grade goes to test scores, 20% on growth. For over a year, we've been talking now about rebalancing that formula. Why hasn't it happened?
I think primarily because there's disagreement in the General Assembly over how that rebalancing ought to occur. The goal is for students to be proficient. If they don't get to proficiency in math and English skills, then they're not going to be able to have a successful career, successful life. They're not going to do well in the rest of their schooling. So that's the ultimate goal. In order to get to proficiency, though, you got to make progress. So there is a tension between, well, how much progress do you have to make so that you ultimately end up being proficient? And somewhere we've got to find the right balance there. But I think we need to keep our eye on the goal, which is proficiency.
An alternative would be to simply issue a different set of grades for the value added as opposed to the test scores. I'm increasingly inclined to that as an idea, because that way you're not suggesting that proficiency isn't the ultimate goal. It clearly is, as Representative Blackwell said. But when we're evaluating schools, presumably we're evaluating the value added or lack of value added, not all of the other factors that influence how a student performs. And so having that grade out there on the value added would be clearly indication of, I mean, you could have a school with relatively low scores but high value added because they're dealing with a highly disadvantaged population, and you could have a school that gets an A or a B. There isn't a lot of value added. It's because the kids were going to do well anyway.
Well, I think we need to rethink this whole idea. I mean, the fact that we have teachers going to work every day, busting their butts, and we have principals working as hard as they can with schools with 75% low-income kids, and we slap an F on the door and say, you all fail, is one of the worst things I think we've ever come up with, especially because there's no outpouring of support and trying to help these kids figure out a better way to do it. We're basically telling your community your school is failing no matter how much they improve.
In some respects, aren't we asking our schools to solve many of society's socioeconomic problems? And is it fair?
We've always been asking schools and teachers to do that. I don't think that the grading scale changes that at all. Teachers have to take whatever walks through the door, and they just don't have control over the environment that a student comes from. So I don't think that the grading scale changes that in any way whatsoever.
Steve, there's been fairly strong evidence that what's going on here is that we are essentially resegregating public schools in North Carolina. In Charlotte-Meck, for instance, 49% of the black students attend low-performing schools. How big a problem is this?
Oh, that is absolutely a huge problem that, in this day and time should absolutely not exist. All of our children deserve a fair and a high-quality education, and our state should be committed to ensuring that things like this does not happen in this day and time.
And we are seeing significant patterns of resegregation. We have schools that are more racially isolated than they were in the 60s, and it's a problem. And you're right when you talk about white flight, and I've said before to other audiences, I think one of the things we're going to have to do is we have to convince white folks that integrated schools are good for all kids.
Hugh Blackwell, I know you all have talked about this quite a bit in the legislature, but what should we do about low-performing schools? Should there be some intervention by the state?
Some of our focused efforts to turn around with Race to the Top, it seems to me, have been marginally successful, if at all. What we need is the leaders in the schools and the flexibility for those leaders to use the resources to get the job done for those students.
We'll have more of our special NC Spin on public education following these messages.
Our state needs a treasurer with a professional investment background, a CPA, not a politician. I'm Ron Elmer, and I want to be your treasurer. Go to elmerfortreasurer.com. paid by Citizens for Elmer.
Connect NC, a bond initiative that makes vital investments in North Carolina without raising taxes.
Connect NC is about investing in our future.
It will create better job training opportunities for the 21st century.
It will make our state safer and better prepared.
It invests in North Carolina's community colleges and our future.
And expand cutting-edge research to strengthen our ag community.
All without raising taxes.
No tax increases.
Please join me in supporting Connect NC.
Hey everyone, I'm Linda Loveland. If feeding your family safe, affordable foods is a priority for you, then join me in saying thanks to the North Carolina farmers who feed us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's say thanks to the farmers who feed your family at #ThankNCFarmers. To learn more about the foods we eat and the farm families who feed us, visit feedthedialoguenc.com. And be sure to thank North Carolina farmers.
Connect NC, a bond initiative that makes vital investments in North Carolina without raising taxes.
Connect NC is about investing in our future.
It will create better job training opportunities for the 21st century.
It will make our state safer and better prepared.
It invests in North Carolina's community colleges and our future.
And expand cutting-edge research to strengthen our ag community.
All without raising taxes.
No tax increases.
Please join me in supporting Connect NC.
Now we return to more NC Spin. North Carolina faces a looming shortage of teachers. We've got turnover at a 5-year high. There's a drop in enrollment in our colleges of education. We're 47th in the nation, or were 47th in the nation in average compensation, rose to 42nd. Keith, we say we want excellent teachers in every classroom, and we want North Carolina to be a teaching destination. But are we sending the message to our educators sufficient to attract and retain them?
Of course we're not. I mean, if you're a teacher in North Carolina, if you've been teaching in North Carolina, let's say since 2008, and what you've seen is you've seen a rapid decline in average teacher salary. We've made some progress, but you've seen basically stagnant wages. You've gone from the national average to near the bottom. You've seen master's pay eliminated. You've seen professional development cut. You've seen the teaching fellows program eliminated. You've seen career status eliminated. You've seen basically an all-out assault on the teachers' assistants and trying to eliminate that help that those teachers need. And to bring it back around to A&F school, you've got letter grades based on the population that you serve slapped on the front door. I don't know how we can say that we're sending the right message to teachers with those kinds of policies.
The scary part of that is when you look at the body of research around what is effective in the classroom, the most effective thing in a classroom is the teacher. It is the teacher who makes the difference, who can overcome the barriers and the obstacles that kids have. And so if you don't have, a good quality teacher who is in the classroom, if you just keep having a first-year teacher every year, unfortunately we know that teacher effectiveness really doesn't come into, the effectiveness is not there until kind of the 4th or 5th year and beyond. When you have this turnover rate, then, our students are the ones who are being disserved. It's not a good investment of our money.
Steve, as somebody that's in the trenches day in and day out, how do you feel charter schools? Do you look at them as competition to public schools?
Absolutely. They are. It's a competition with public schools, but it also allows us as a public school to be reflective of things that, we can continue to do well. It's always painful to hear a parent say, we've chosen another option. So we want to know why. What is it that the public schools can change? But we also would love the flexibility that charter schools have, as well as whether it's funding, whether it's the school calendar. We'd also love to have those flexibilities.
I think there are professionals at the Department of Public Instruction who believe that we need to get the best education we can for our kids, and that charter schools, voucher schools, traditional public schools all ought to be held to the same standards, have the same accountability, take the same tests, give parents all the information so they can make informed choices. We shouldn't just be carving out special dispensation for people who choose a different path.
Have we, in fact, lowered accountability for charter schools?
I'm not sure that we've lowered it. I think we may not have gotten it to the place it needs to be.
No, I think we should close chronically low-performing public schools, no matter whether they answer to a district school board or a charter school board. I do think consistency is good. Let's apply the standard appropriately. There are schools that are consistently low performing. Closing them and reopening them in some other fashion with different governance is a good idea, whether we're talking about district-run schools or charter schools.
One of the problems is we don't have true choice. If a charter school doesn't offer free lunch or transportation, there's a segment of our population that simply can't apply to that charter school, even if they live next door to it, if they can't afford a lunch every day. So if it's really going to be real choice and competition, then let's level the playing field and give every child the opportunity to apply to all these schools.
But I think that we are starting to loop and look at charters as an alternative, as almost a private option for public school parents. I think it's a risk, frankly, for charter advocates to go down that path. I think it's going to set up a fight that we don't need to have. Look at what just happened in the last week with the lieutenant governor apparently spiking a report that he thought was too negative toward charter schools. I'll hold my breath when the first report that looks too negative about public schools gets spiked.
When the subject of school choice is raised, we've got to include the opportunities, scholarships, or vouchers for low-income families. Now, we're in our first year of actual implementation of it. Are there early indicators of how well it's working, or when will we know for sure whether this is a successful program or not?
Sure. To the best of my knowledge, the data is still a little too early to tell. Vouchers are certainly a controversial issue, and a lot of people have opinions about them. And although we generally support school choice and public charters as an example, vouchers can be particularly problematic from a business perspective. If I'm a business and a customer comes to me and says, I don't like your product or service, I'm going to invest everything I can in my own product or service to make it better. I'm not going to give you a coupon to go to another competitor.
So, Hugh, let me put you on a spot. We don't know how well this is working. Why did the legislature dramatically increase the funding for these vouchers from $10.8 to $24 million when we don't even know? We're going to have 6,000 of these kids next year with vouchers, supposedly.
Well, of course, the legislature doesn't adopt a reason when it adopts the budget for each item. So I'm going to I'll have to speculate. I might not have gone quite as far, but I think the argument was that there was a pent-up demand demonstrated by applications for the original level, and that in order to meet the demand for parents who wanted that choice, that we needed to provide the additional
Wasn't that taking dollars away from traditional public schools?
Only if it took a student away, and the dollars that leave are less than the dollars per student that remain.
John, there's an awful lot of concern people have about the actual schools that are receiving the money for these vouchers. Most of them are faith-based schools.
Well, my kids went to both public and private schools. I felt better at the private school that I had a real test, a nationally standardized test that was not controlled by anybody, that told me exactly how my students did. In my opinion, my kids, I had more accountability, I had more knowledge about how they were doing in the private school than in the public school, because the public school test, while maybe valid, told me nothing about how they compare to the rest of the country and the rest of the world.
But Catholic hospitals that take Medicare and Medicaid patients have strict regulations and accountability standards. If they don't do their job, then there's a penalty to pay. There's no specific test that private schools have to take. It just has to be a national test, which isn't identified. And this is not an exaggeration.
What test do you think they're giving?
They can take anyone they want. There's a significant.
They give the Iowa test, the Stanford test. They give good tests.
So it doesn't trouble you that we have religious schools who use the A. Beckett textbooks from Bob Jones University that teach kids in science class that dinosaurs and humans coexisted, that our tax dollars are actually paying for that in schools in North Carolina. I think we need to have some accountability about what they're learning.
Steve, there are some suggestions that the legislature should establish what are called education savings accounts, essentially giving parents a pot of money for their students and let them choose where they want to go spend it. The Public School Forum strongly opposes this idea. Do you agree, and tell us why?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think we have to be careful when we're using our tax dollars to be able to allow parents to use it that way, which does impact our public schools. So we have to be very careful when we allow choice in that manner to happen. What is the impact of what's going to happen in our schools that we have where there are children who could use those dollars in terms of making sure that they have a high-quality education?
In just a few moments, we'll have more public education discussion on NC Spin.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
I've devoted my life to public safety. That's why I back Buck.
We need a strong Attorney General. That's why I back Buck.
I want someone who protects our freedom, and that's why I back Buck.
In the upcoming Republican primary, back Buck. Buck Newton for Attorney General.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at OurNCHealthcare.com.
Let's prepare our state for the future by supporting the Connect NC bond. The bond will fund smart investments in education, agriculture, state parks, our National Guard, and infrastructure projects, creating job opportunities, strengthening our workforce, and driving innovation. It's a timely investment and a smart one for North Carolina families. On March 15th, stand with Farm Bureau and vote for the Connect NC bond.
Let's return to our program devoted to public education. How would you assess the state of public education in our state? John, I'll start with you.
Improving, but still a long way to go.
Keith?
I actually agree. I think that we've improving. We're doing more than we've ever done before, but we've got room for improvement for sure.
Representative Blackwell?
It's hard to disagree with that general step. I think we need to particularly focus on developing stronger leadership among principals, because they have the ability in the school building to move resources around and deploy assets.
Absolutely. I agree that we still have a lot of room for improvement, and employing strong principals and great teachers is a key to that.
Melanie?
Certainly agree. We definitely see that the schools of North Carolina have been one of the great attractors for businesses to come to the state and to expand. So we want to build on that strong reputation that we have, continue that growth, that improvement.
It's hard to disagree. I do think we're improving, but I think our educators and communities are being asked to do more with less, and at some point you can only do less with less, and I think that's the concern as we move forward.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this special program on public education, and we thank our panelists and especially the Public School Forum of North Carolina for inviting us to their second annual Eggs and Issues Breakfast. If you want to see the unedited full discussion, you can find it on our website, ncspin.com, on YouTube, or on the Public School Forum website. Next week, we return to our regular format of balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin. Thank you.